Welcome to Unit 1, Section 3, Texas and the Mexican-American War. This is a great example of American imperialism and probably one of the best examples that we could come up with. And I thought it was fitting that we put this quote from Henry David Thoreau, because Henry David Thoreau lived at this time and actually would not pay taxes because he didn't believe the war was justified. And because he wouldn't pay taxes, he was thrown into jail. He is the author of Civil Disobedience, the same practice that Gandhi and Martin Luther King practiced for their work for civil rights. And so Henry David Thoreau here says, disobedience is the true foundation of liberty. The obedient must be slaves. And I think what he's trying to say here is you know you live in a free country if you can disobey, or you can at least view or do what the country doesn't want you to do and still not be thrown in jail and still be able to be free. And so here we have Henry David Thoreau, who will not pay taxes, and although he has to go to prison, he's able to voice that opinion in opposition with the Mexican-American War. So the question is why? Why was he so against the Mexican-American War? What was the Mexican-American War fought over? Why was it such a dispute? And who was right and who was wrong? And like most things in history, we're going to find that it is complicated. So here's our objectives. Focus question has not changed. How has imperialism impacted the United States with its development of foreign policy? Okay, so you've looked at, so far, the first two sections were about other countries and their early imperialism to the United States. This is the first example that we're giving of American imperialism to another country. Now, that doesn't mean it's the first one ever in the U.S. It's not. There are many examples of imperialism from the U.S., but this is going to be the first one we're going to be talking about. First objective, who are the native people from Texas? What are they called? What is their title? Objective 2, what were the rules if you wanted to become a Mexican citizen? Many Americans wanted to become Mexican citizens at this time period. What are the rules? What do people have to follow if they want to be a citizen of Mexico and have land in Mexico? Objective 3, what was the border dispute between Mexico and Texas? And when I say what was the border dispute, I'm talking about like where was the argument? Like Mexico said it was where Mexico ended and Texas began, and Texas said this is where Texas begins and Mexico ends. What was the border dispute there? And objective 4, what advantages did the U.S. have over Mexico exactly? So let's go on. I really used to connect this conflict with Russia and the Ukraine, because these two conflicts are incredibly complementary, not in a good way, but they're very similar. So I wanted to talk about that, but we're not going to do that because this has not got a lot to do with that right now. So, but this is an issue. If you ever are interested, you can click on these links and it'll give you more information about the Ukraine and Russia and Mexico and America. So first off, let's talk a little bit here. Texas is owned by Mexico at this time, and it's the closest province to the U.S. And as the U.S. is starting to expand, farmers are looking out to get more and more land. They're wanting to go out farther west. The problem is they don't own this land, so they can't just go, put up some farm. The small population of people living in Texas, they're named or are called Tianos. A Tiano was a Hispanic origin living person in Texas, and there was probably around like 4,000 or so in the entire state. So it's not a lot of people living there. It's very scarce inhabitants. But there are people living there, and they've lived there for a very long time. It's not like it's no one lives there. It's completely open. There is people living there. And they're called Tianos. And that's the answer to objective 1 there. Now, Americans are going to decide, well, if we want this land, we can't get it as Americans because there's no land that we can get right now. But if we become Mexican citizens, then we'll be able to get it with the hope that America will one day own this land anyway. That's in the back of the head. You got to remember that. So the Americans are going to take this land, say, yes, we'll become Mexican immigrants. We're Mexican citizens now. But instead of expecting to stay Mexican citizens and being patriotic and waving the Mexican flag, it's going to be absolutely the opposite. They're hoping that the United States will one day come in and own this land. That's the idea. And really, we could call this manifest destiny if you think about it. This is the idea of manifest destiny, that we should own all this land from sea to shining sea. We should own it all. So, to become a Mexican citizen, the Americans have to do a couple things. Number one, they have to adopt, or not adopt, I'm sorry, they have to adapt the Mexican Constitution. Here's the one problem with that. You, in order to adopt it, have to say that you won't bring slaves into the country. Mexico is against slavery. They will not allow slavery to be established in Mexico. This is problematic, especially if you're a Southerner and you like slavery and think slavery is great. You can't bring slaves in. So how are you going to start your farm? So that's one of many things. So number one, if you want to become a Mexican citizen, you can't have slaves. Number two, you have to convert to Roman Catholicism. You have to become a Catholic. That's going to be problematic too. A lot of people are very, particular about their religion. They don't want to become a Roman Catholic. And the last one is going to be that you have to learn Spanish. You actually have to learn how to speak Spanish. These are the three rules, and this is the answer to objective two, the three rules of becoming a Mexican citizen. Now, by and large, you should know this. The vast majority of Americans totally ignore this. They do not. They bring slaves over. They become Roman Catholic in name only. They don't really follow it. They go to mass. They don't care about Roman Catholicism. They stay Protestant, and they also don't learn Spanish. Okay, so there's not a lot of. If you want to talk about immigrants, the Americans were the worst immigrants ever when they immigrated to Mexico. Just terrible immigrants. Okay. Now, one of these first Texas immigrants who comes into Mexico is Stephen F. Austin. He's one of the very first immigrants. You may get kind of already based on his name, Austin, that he's going to settle a town or an area called Austin. This is near San Antonio today. He's going to establish this area called Austin. This area is going to be built up of mostly Southerners. Okay, so by 1835, we have about 30,000 American immigrants living in Texas, and they're going to start calling themselves Anglo-Texan. Anglo meaning English, so they're English descendants. Texan, living in Texas, so Anglo-Texan. And they're going to outnumber the Tejanos 6-1. So now if we look at Texas, the population changes from, 4,000 Tejanos to 6 times that. Okay, so we've got over 30,000 Americans and only these 4,000 Tejanos. So we're going to start seeing that the policies, the way that people are thinking is not going to be really representative of what the Tejano thinks, but really more representative of what the Americans think. And if you believe in democracy, well, then that's a good thing because the vast majority, the majority of the opinion wins, right? They get what they want. So this is going to be problematic for the Tejanos and for Mexico. So Mexico, in response, is going to come up with a law, and it's going to be called the Law of April 6, 1830. Now, you don't need to read the source. I did this as an exercise in class. But in this source, what you would realize is that they're going to establish some very basic things. They're going to talk about, hey, what do we want to make sure these settlers are doing? How are we going to make sure they're living this way? And they really come back and they say, we're going to enforce this. You better not have any slaves. You better be speaking Spanish. You better be Catholic. And you better accept the Mexican Constitution. And they're really going to hit that hard. Well, these, these Texas Anglo-Texans don't really respond very well to this. And so they're going to come up with their what they call Texan consultations between the year 1832 and 1833. And they're going to say, this is what we think in response to your law, what we think about that. So tensions are rising between America and Mexico, okay? Most of them, like I said, are going to remain Protestant and they're going to bring slaves in. They're not going to worry about the Mexican government, really, because Mexico has got bigger fish to fry. Mexico is trying to fight off Spain, and they're trying to have their own country. And so they're so worried about that they really can't address the American problem in Texas. One of the most, in fact, probably the most important leader at this time in Mexico is going to be Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Santa Anna, which I'll probably refer to him as this from now on, is going to be a great, powerful general, and he's going to seize all this power and become a dictator of Mexico. Now, this is not what ideally most Mexicans wanted. Most Mexicans did not like the idea of a dictator. They wanted a government like the U.S. They wanted a democratic republic. Instead, Santa Anna comes in and he appoints himself a military leader of the entire country. So, although they're happy to have gotten rid of Spain, they're not happy because they have a dictator, okay? Now, the settlers, they're not following the law, like I said. They've been bringing slaves in, and all of a sudden Santa Anna's like, you're going to start following these rules that we put in place. You're not having slaves here. You got to start speaking Spanish. You have to go to church. to mass. You have to be Catholic. The settlers are going to have a kind of an interesting quote. They're going to say, "He will give liberty to our slaves and make us slaves of ourselves." They keep fueling this idea of fear, right? They say, "Oh, if Santa Anna gets his way, then our slaves will be free and we'll be the slaves." This isn't at all what he's saying. He's just simply saying, "You guys said when you became citizens you wouldn't bring slaves over, and you're bringing slaves over, so you can't do that." But that's not the message that's going to happen. The Anglo-Texans are going to spread out and say that he is trying to hurt us. He's trying to get rid of our traditions, and they're not going to like him very much. The settlers are going to want autonomy. They want to be completely separated. Their really best case scenarios, they want the United States to own. They want the United States to own Texas. They want this. The problem is America does not want to get involved in this war, so they're not going to do that. So in 1835, there's going to be a bunch of Anglo-Texans who are going to get together, and they're going to take a Mexican garrison. A garrison is a small group of soldiers that are in one area. They're going to do this at Goliad and San Antonio, okay? And so they do this, they take over this place, and they've basically said, 1836, we are now our own independent Republican Constitution. We're our own country. We are the Lone Star Republic. And if you look at Texas's flag today, you can still see that they have a single star in the middle of the flag, and that's why they're called the Lone Star Republic, is their flag becomes a lone star. Okay. Now, again, the United States, they're hoping that the United States will just come up really quickly and say, okay, you guys want to be part of the U.S. and be a state? Sure. That's not what's going to happen. The United States is really weary about doing this. There's not a lot of support because there's this big question. If we accept Texas, what's the one thing that's really hurting the United States, that's really splitting the United States at this time? It's this question of, is the United States a slave country or not? And if we take Texas in, or any new territory, any new state, the question is, does it become a slave state or does it become a free state? The North obviously wants it to be a free state. The South wants it to be a slave state. Okay? So they take over this area. They've declared independence. They're not part of the United States. They're not part of Mexico. They're their own country. So right now there's three countries right there: U.S., Lone Star Republic, and Mexico. Now, in response to this rebellion in 1836, in March of that year, Santa Anna is going to go specifically attack the Anglo-Texans at the Alamo. This is where this small group of Anglo-Texans is staying at. Now, the Alamo is a former mission home. This is where a bunch of Jesuit priests were living at one point in time and trying to convert the natives of the area to Catholicism, okay? And so when Santa Anna gets there, he is going to just spend 12 days of just constant firing of cannon fire at the Alamo, and it's just going to destroy the whole area. Okay? So here's the problem. There's some really famous people. There's not a lot. There's not very many Americans that are there, or Anglo-Texans, I should call them. So you've got people like Jim Bowie, had the Bowie knife. You had Davy Crockett, obviously very famous, right? And they basically, Santa Anna gets these guys, and he decides he's going to execute them. So if they didn't die in the fight, they end up dying by being executed by Santa Anna. Now, Santa Anna does this because he wants to send a strong message to American immigrants. If you're going to stay here, you're going to follow our rules. You're not going to be something like that. But it actually has the exact opposite effect. What it does is it makes Santa Anna make them martyrs. And when I say martyrs are people who die for a cause, and these men died for this cause. And now people are going to remember their memory of these people in order to rally people, get people excited to go up against Santa Anna. In fact, they'll say things like, remember the Alamo. And this rallying cries, remember how the Santa Anna, those men, they killed all of us Americans. There was only like 12 of us and they killed us all. Remember that? Remember the Alamo. We have to go fight them. And it's going to be this defense, not just for autonomy, not just for freedom of Texas, but now we've got to fight because we want to fight in honor of the martyrs. Sam Houston is one of these men. Sam Houston gets revenge on Santa Anna in the Battle of San Juancito, and he ends up trapping Santa Anna in this kind of blockade trap. And 630 men were killed and 730 were captured. And on the Anglo-Texan side, there was only 32 casualties. So this is a huge success. Sam Houston just becomes huge, right? And you can guess, just like Stephen F. Austin, the city of Austin is named after him. Sam Houston, the city of Houston, is named after him. So Santa Anna gets captured, okay? And when he gets captured, they basically put a gun to his head and they say, "You're going to give Mexico to us." So Santa Anna doesn't really have a lot of choice. It's either sign or die, and he's going to create this new land. And the border is going to become a dispute. And this is going to start into that next objective, that question for you. What's the disputed area? And here's what it is. There's a river called the Nueces River, and there's also the Rio Grande. And the Nueces River runs here and the Rio Grande here. And so now, okay, who owns this? It's never really settled on. Mexico says, Santa Ana says Rio Grande. He gives all the way to the Rio Grande. But Mexico's like, no, it's the Nueces River. And so there's this dispute. And Mexico's not going to be very happy with Santa Ana. They're going to be really upset because they're going to say, you signed away a huge chunk of land. And Santa Ana's going to be like, well, I had to. They were going to kill me. This is not going to be an easily settled thing. So even though this is uncontested Texas now, the Lone Star Republic, this is by Anglo-Texans accounts part of Texas, but by Mexican standpoint, it is part of Mexico. They're going to be fighting over this, okay? So this is going to be the major dispute between the two. Now, Sam Houston becomes the first president. He's this instant hero, right? Because he's the one that got revenge for the Alamo. He becomes the first president of Texas. And he asks immediately when he becomes the president of Texas, the very first thing he does is he asks President Jackson to annex Texas. Now, what does it mean to annex? Annexing means to take in, to accept, to adopt. He's asking President Jackson to just take Texas. Now, Jackson would have loved to have done that. But again, Jackson isn't really in charge of this. This is something that Congress gets to decide. And Congress is fighting big time on this. Now, the South wants Texas, and so does the North. But the question is does it become a slave state or a free state? So for 10 years, Texas is going to apply for annexation, and they're just not going to be given it. They're not. They're just going to be ignored because what do? Do you make it a free state or a slave state? Okay. Now Texas at one point, funny enough, will actually bluff and they'll say, "Okay, fine. If America's not going to take us, then we'll join with England." It was a complete bluff. They never were going to do it. They just said that simply because they were hoping that by saying that um, America would hurry up and take Texas so that way England couldn't get it. But it doesn't work. America doesn't want it yet because they know whatever the decision is, it's going to be a huge problem with the slave question. So there's this expansionist policy, and an expansionist is somebody that believes that we should practice or expand our territory as far as we can. So this is people like John L. Sullivan. This is like James K. Polk. This is going to be like a lot of people at the time period, and they want to expand and get farther. The idea of from owning from sea to shining sea is an expansionist policy. It's manifest destiny. Okay, so in the presidential election of 1844, there's this Southern expansionist. His name's James K. Polk. A lot of the Southerners really wanted him because number one, he's a Southerner, and number two, number two, he wants to expand and move into Texas. But James K. Polk is not stupid. He understands that it's not really up to him, it's up to Congress. And he realizes that if he's going to get Texas, he's going to have to make a concession for the North. He's got to do something. He's got to give the North something. Okay? Now, Jacksonian Democrats at the time period were slaveholders. They believed in manifest destiny, the article you read from John L. Sullivan. And they believe in this expansionist idea that God's on our side. God wants us to own this land. And so, really, can we be in the wrong if God wants to own it? And that's going to be the kind of the viewpoint. And James K. Polk is one of these Jacksonian Democrats. He's a man of the people. He's from the South. He believes in slavery. He wants to expand it. But again, he knows that he can't fight this. Now, one thing that we don't really realize today we look at the president so much, but back then, representatives or senators were really big figures. So Henry Clay is perhaps one of the biggest names ever in American history, and he's probably, I would say almost definitely one of the biggest senators in U.S. history. And he's going to oppose this annexation of Texas. And the reason being is he's going to say, what are you going to do? Make it slave or free? Polk believes that if he can get the North something, if he can give them something, then the South can have Texas. And so that's what he's going to really run on, is he wants to have the North get something so he can take Texas. Okay, so he's going to come up with this new slogan, like Donald Trump has, "Make America Great Again." Barack Obama had hope and change. Here is what James K. Polk's was. James K. Polk said in the election, he would say 54-40 or fight. 54-40 or fight. And what he was talking about is he was talking about the lines of longitude and latitude of territory. And he's basically saying we need to have the lines of 54-40 or we're going to fight England. Now, Polk's going to really run on this. He's going to say this, and he said, I'm going to fight England. If they don't give us Oregon, I'm going to fight them. Polk then goes and talks, once he actually gets elected, he goes and talks to England, and he's definitely starts tuning down his fighting. Polk settles with the British, and he says, we'll share Oregon, and we'll split it at the 49th parallel. Okay? So we're going to split it at the 49th parallel. Okay? Now, that would be modern-day Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Okay? And so he's going to get an awful lot of land, but the problem is that it's not what he promised, 50, 40, 40, or fight. It's 49. Okay? And so a lot of people are going to poke at him. They're going to say, you didn't get what you said you'd get. You said you would get, that you would get 50, 40, 54 or 40 or fight, and you didn't get it. And they're going to feel betrayed in a big way. They're going to feel like he didn't deliver on his promise. I think he actually got a lot more than if I was England, what I would have ever given up. But they don't like that he promised whatever and he didn't get it. So England gets modern day what's called British Columbia, and the United States get modern day Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. Okay, so Northerners feel betrayed. They don't feel like Polk really delivers, but the South is very happy because they get Texas. So Texas becomes a state in December 1845. The question is, though, where is the land? Polk is going to follow the Texas belief that it goes all the way to the Rio Grande. But again, who doesn't believe it goes this far? It only goes to the Nueces River, Mexico. So there's going to be a fight. Congress is going to declare war. It's going to say, Mexico, you guys said we get this land. Mexico is going to say, no, you don't. And so a war is going to be brought out to really hammer out who gets what. The war is going to be led by a future president, but at the time, General Zachary Taylor, Mr. Rough and Ready himself. This guy was very rough. He was not polished. He became our president, but he was so unpresidential that a lot of times people went to the White House never even realizing that they walked past the president because he didn't look very presidential. He dressed very haggardly. He smoked a lot. He was a very rough guy, a very soldier guy. So in May of 1846, Mexico is going to have a patrol that's trying to keep the border at the Nueces River. And America is going to specifically send soldiers over the Nueces, over by the Rio Grande. And what's going to happen is there's going to be a clash, there's going to be a fight, and Mexico is going to shoot, and 11 soldiers that are Americans are going to die. Now, this is a huge deal because the way that it's reported, though, in the news is Mexico kills American soldiers in America's land. So basically what they're trying to sell you on the news is that these men were minding their own business, not doing anything, just chewing gum, and they were in America, and then they got shot to death with no fault of their own from Mexico. The reality is much more difficult, right? These men are in the contested area. Mexico says, no, you don't own this. This is our land. But America is not going to listen to that, and so there's going to be this fight, and then they're going to later claim that these men were on the American side, when in fact they were not. So there's not two articles for you guys to read. Again, this is an in-class assignment, but really be thinking about the Mexican-American War. What does this mean? What does this have to deal with in the United States? And is this an example of imperialism? Was it okay to do this? Was it not okay? Why or why not? So the Southern Democrats are in favor of this war because they want to expand. They're very much about this manifest destiny idea. The Northern Whigs believe that Polk provoked the war because he sent these guys over the Nueces River. They're not excited about this, okay? But they're scared that Polk is going to take huge amounts of land to make slave states. And they don't want that, okay? They don't want that at all. The war is going to have a tremendous support. And Federalists are this is going to be when we see the end of the Federalist Party because they don't support the war. They're going to say, this is not a war that we wanted. Polk started this war with Mexico. And because of that, you're going to see the Federalists go bye-bye. So let's talk about the war itself a little bit here. Now, there are some advantages, and I believe this is the last objective that you guys have. So here's some of the advantages of the United States. Number one, the United States is by far wealthier. We've been a country for, over 40 years at this point. And so we've got a lot more wealth and a lot more stability than what Mexico has at this point because they just have been a country for 15 years by this point. The other problem is that we have a much larger population. That's part of the reason we're wealthier is because we have more people in taxing and everything like that. So we're much larger in population. We have industry already. We have businesses that are being formed. They're making weapons. They can make weapons quickly. So we don't run out of supplies as easy. We have a navy and an artillery. So a navy is, you obviously know, fighting with the ships and on the sea. Artillery is going to be cannon fire. It's going to be missiles, things like that. That's what artillery is today. And so we have a navy and artillery, and Mexico does not. And we also have these very seasoned, very good generals, and many of them are very famous, even from this list. So Zachary Taylor, he'll become president, becomes a hero. Winfield Scott is a huge general. He actually wins. We'll see him in a second here against the Mexican-American War. And Winfield Scott also will be put in charge about helping the Native Americans, the Cherokee, off to Oklahoma later. Okay, Robert E. Lee is incredibly famous at this time, and he obviously becomes the main general for the South during the Civil War. Ulysses Simpson Grant also becomes a huge general at this time, and William T. Sherman, very famous. Now, all these guys were very famous, and they really got their starts, besides Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott. A lot of them got their starts at this time period. They started their fighting at this time period. So all these officers that I just listed later fought in the Civil War, except for Zachary Taylor. Mexico was divided as Santa Anna and resumed having its power. Okay, so Mexico gets separated out, and Santa Anna resumes power and control, and this is going to have some major impacts on the conflict. So by 1846, the U.S. is going to win basically every major battle between Mexico and the United States. The U.S. is going to win. Stephen W. Kearny is going to go into New Mexico. He's going to conquer it. This is a big deal because now we have a new state. So not only do we have Texas, now we have New Mexico. John C. Fremont, an admiral in the Navy, he's going to go to California and seize control from the Mexicans living in California. Okay, and they're going to create in California, just like Texas, where they created the Lone Star Republic. California is going to create the Bear Flag Republic. That's why California on their flag has a bear. Okay, so they create the Bear Flag Republic, and they wanted to join the United States as well. But again, we get into that problem of, okay, what about the North? What about the South? They'll ultimately figure it out, but that's going to be a major problem. Zachary Taylor seized Monterrey, Mexico in September, so he got all of Monterrey, which was a huge deal. And Mexico's going to start trying to retake the city, but it's not going to be any match for basically Zachary Taylor, okay? So you're going to see them fighting in several different battles, the Battle of Buena Vista and others, and they're going to lose significantly. Now, perhaps one of the most important things here is Winfield Scott. This is this guy, this picture of him right here. Winfield Scott goes to Veracruz, and he marches all the way to Mexico City, and he conquers everything. Now, you think about this. I don't have a map right here, but you see Mexico City is way farther inland. It is not close to the border. It's very far inland. And there's going to be this major, glorious battle. Okay, it's going to be a battle, very bloody battle. 6 young Mexican cadets, ranging from the years 13 to 19, will die in this battle. Today, Mexico even celebrates these young deaths as the Los Niños Heroes, and they are celebrated every year during Mexican independence. So by September 1847, basically Winfield Scott's gone all the way to Mexico City, and everyone's basically like, what can we do? If we don't stop the war now, the United States is going to own all of Mexico. And so they will stop the war, and they're going to sign a peace treaty. And in that peace treaty, the borders that we now know of, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, all those are going to now become states under the United States of America. And America is going to give Mexico, or let Mexico keep just Mexico. Now, you can look at this a couple different ways. Is this good or is this bad? You could say that America has the military, has the finances, has the ability, so that's good. And we took what we these are the spoils of war. On the other hand, the United States really had no business fighting these wars. They really had no business taking this land. These were unjustified wars. It wasn't like Mexico did something to us. It's that the United States wanted the land and justified their ability to get it. So that's the end of the notes there. If you come back to the objectives, who are the native people from Texas called? They are called Tianos, remember? Okay. What were the rules if you wanted to become a Mexican citizen? Remember, you had to adopt the Mexican Constitution, ban slavery, become Roman Catholic, and I don't have this written here, but you should write this down as well. Speak Spanish. Okay, those were the different rules you had to have. What was the border dispute between Mexico and Texas? Remember that it was between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande River. And the last thing remember was um, what are the U.S. advantages over Mexico? Wealthier, larger, including population, industry, Navy, artillery, the officers that we have. All those are different advantages that we had. So hopefully you got all the notes there, and hopefully you got all the objectives answered. Hope this helps you guys, and be ready to see you guys on Thursday. Thanks.